Thank you again to Dr. George Tully. And now we're very excited and honored to have the tribal keynote panel composed of Jill Horowitz, Juan Cancel, Dave Snedeker. If I say that wrong, I'm so sorry. Shaneker, close enough, right? And Quentin Cypress. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for having us. Jill Horowitz, the Senator Blanket Officer for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Not our full intended panel, but this morning could join us, so we were apologetic for the change, but I think we have a really great cross-section of our work here and how it intersects, and we're really excited to bring that forward to you. So yeah, if everyone wants to introduce themselves, and we'll go through.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Oh, there he goes. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan Cancel, the Assistant Director at the Tribal Historic Preservation Office for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Just a little background on myself. I've been working for the tribe, serving the tribal community for a little over 15 years now. I started with my background's in GIS, worked at the New York Public Library before coming to the Seminole Tribe, and worked at different capacities with mapping, and now assistant director, helping our 4 main areas deal with preservation and protection of cultural resources for the tribe.
Hi, everybody. A little too close. I'm Dave Shadecker. I am the historian for the tribe. I'm also the senior research coordinator. I'm a historic archaeologist, and I've worked in many places around the world, mostly Texas, Florida, a little bit in Ecuador and Zimbabwe, and got a job with the tribe, which is basically my dream job. So very happy lately. Thank you.
Nice. I didn't know you were in Zimbabwe.
Yep.
Pretty cool. Hi, my name is Quentin Cypress. I'm the community engagement manager for the Heritage Environmental Resource Office. I am a tribal member myself. I've been with the tribe for like 10 years. I started during high school. So it's been pretty good. Been working with Juan ever since. So, and I must say, Dave's a great historian. So it's good to see you guys today.
Thank you. So I don't know how many people in the audience have had an opportunity to partner with or work with or come out and visit the Seminole Tribe of Florida before, one of the reservations, or work with the department. Can I have a raise of hands? Anybody that's been able to?
Oh, wow.
Okay, good. Okay, so so the tribe has a very rich history and an important place in the modern context as well, as far as Florida history. It's definitely, one of the strong communities in the state, and one that a lot of people actually don't know a lot about. So I'm glad to see that you all have some experiences. We have a video that we wanted to play just as an introduction. Does anyone want to talk about it, or just is it self-explanatory?
So it's an interview with one of the tribe's elders, and just a quick glimpse to give everyone, just kind of set the tone for our discussion. And it was an interview with Quentin Cypress and Mr. Paul Buster. And I'll let the video speak for itself.
Well, Paul, I'm glad to be here today to speak about the Everglades. You're singer and songwriter. Can you talk to us a bit more about that? Yes. Being born and raised at Big Cypress, there are a lot of things that has gone on around me, growing up from a little boy to who I am today. The sounds of birds, swamp birds, the sounds of a deer chasing one another, the sound of a bear. It gives me an idea. It gives me an inspiration. And if I had a pen and a paper, I'd write it down. And that's how I come up with most of my stories and songs. That's good. I think that's what makes your songs so beautiful. So how do you feel about the Everglades and how they look now compared to when you were younger? Totally different from 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, especially. And I'm sure that people are doing their best to make an improvement here in South Florida. But going back 60 years kind of almost makes you cry sometimes because it's totally different. A lot of things, plants, etc., are not native. Even a lot of fishes, animals are not native. So it's totally different today.
Yeah, everything, is totally different with all the invasive species, the Brazilian pepper, the Mayaluca, invasive fish, which basically have to put on these invasive species fishing covenants just to clear up the waterways. So I can't imagine how different it must look from then to now. When it comes to your songs, like I said, a lot of them are about the Everglades and the environment. Which one would you say is probably your favorite?
One of my favorite songs is about the Everglades, and particularly Blackwater Bayou gave me an inspiration about being in the environment, the elements that it is. Sometimes it can be dangerous, but sometimes, most times, and a lot of times, it can be a good therapy for a Seminole Indian. And that's why I came up with that song called Blackwater Bayou.
I agree, being out here in nature is very healing for us. To close this out, you think you play some chords for that song?
Sure, I can. I've got my guitar right here. This old guitar kind of hangs around me for a good reason. Write songs such as Blackwater Bayou. I'll give us maybe a line of it. If you ever get the urge, go down in the Blackwater Bayou. If you ever get the feel, go down the Blackwater Bayou.
With that, I just want to say, remember, go to your local barber before you get a close up. We just showed that to the White House a couple of days ago as well. Not too happy about it.
It's always good to look better in person though, don't you think? You set expectations.
I guess so.
It was beautiful. It was the first time I saw it, so I'm glad you guys brought it.
It's like the fourth time I've seen it.
It's more awkward every day.
Yeah.
So we're just going to go through a little bit of an introduction back and forth, and then you'll see how things are woven together, and we'll have plenty of time for question and answer all together. So I'll just go first. I work for the Seminole Tribe of Florida a little under 2 years now. The Climate Resiliency Program is a new program, and the goal is to blend, Western-based kind of science with Indigenous teachings and science. So really trying to figure out, how to do that. What does that mean? And that's a daily type of question, right? Like that's me questioning myself and my way of thinking every single day. And trying to grow that kind of Indigenous knowledge, throughout the program for myself, staff, community as well. That's something that needs to get built back up, right, a little bit, and through all components of agencies and other partnerships respected, right? So it's multi-directional. But that's the goal of the program. And just like Dave said, it's my dream job. So happy to be here. I didn't read that, but maybe I should. In doing that, we aim to protect future generations, repair a broken system of relationships, and heal the land and ecosystems we depend on. So kind of going back to that braiding sweetgrass like philosophy that Greg mentioned. Thanks. So a lot of what I do is, science-based, like making sure I understand like the latest like projections for impacts and all of that affects all of our communities here in South Florida, right? But I would say maybe 70% of what I do is actually my favorite part, which is encouraging conversations on climate change and making sure that those conversations are culturally appropriate, which is difficult for me to do considering I'm not a tribal member, right? So it's learning ways to be respectful and to encourage that kind of natural conversation. So one of the ways that I do that is the one staff person that I have, my climate change coordinator, Cody Motlow, the bottom picture there, she interviews other tribal members. And those interviews are sometimes published in the Seminole Tribune. So that's one way of having these like conversations on different climate change topics. Next slide. We have also created a Gathering Fire series where we call the community together around like a campfire to have conversations that are multi-generational. We've been able to do this a couple times this last year. We're looking forward to doing it again this year. Paul Buster, who you just saw, was actually at our Hollywood event as our elder and our storyteller. So I got to meet him, and he is amazing, powerful storyteller. So this is something that we hope to keep going, but lots of different topics are raised within this. The tribe is obviously more of like a oral storytelling, tradition historically. So having lengthy reports is not really of interest to the tribe or myself any longer. It's something we do when we need to, but this is where you really get to the good stuff, right? And just encouraging that kind of conversation and relationship building. Next slide. Thank you. We also have a food sovereignty work group. It's interesting when I first asked tribal members, like, what climate impacts are you most worried about? The departments had one answer to that, and tribal members had a very different answer to that. And very much tribal members were interested in traditional food and how far they've gotten away from that, and how, having control over healthy food, locally grown food, organic, traditional food can be healing. So this is something that I think all communities are starting to kind of touch upon, and there are obvious climate change impacts. When food is traveled across the world, grown in high intensive energy and water intense situations, pesticide, everything. I mean, it's definitely a climate change issue. So I just love working on this because it's tangible and it's something that, again, brings people together. So we've been touring different community gardens and talking about ways that we can encourage gardening or just, more ecologically friendly foods as well. And we talk a lot about flooding, right? Like for climate change, like in South Florida, we talk about sea level rise and flooding, Mike, right? Like all the time, right? It's a big focus. But another thing that I like to point out is extreme heat. It's a silent killer of climate change. We are already feeling it. I feel like the last 5 years, we've really started to notice it, right? If you've been here, it's not a future thing or projection. The projections do look bad in the future, but we're already starting to feel it and see it in a way more than we are for the flooding. So this is something that affects all of our communities, and especially youth, elders, anybody that exercises or works outside is definitely feeling this. And this has a lot of impacts on basically every system of your body. So it's a major health concern and something, again, that's tangible that we're having conversations in the tribe about. We actually started our first sustainability book club this summer, actually reading Braiding Sweetgrass. So that's going on now. And over the next month, we're going to have discussion sessions on that. So I highly encourage everyone to read the book if you haven't already. It is absolutely a beautiful book, and I think just totally accessible for anyone, tribal member or non-tribal member. It's just beautifully written. And it's a great way to kind of understand this connection to and reconnection with Indigenous science. So, and then Juan's going to talk.
So when you look at, thank you, Joe. Joe said a really good overview of how we're dealing with climate issues. I mean, Joe's program may be new, but I mean, the idea's been there for, thousands of years, right? Like the tribe is caretakers of its land, and just now how we're dealing with this and getting the expertise, someone like Jill and Dave, and then Quentin. I think that's what you're seeing up here with our panel. We're going to see the different scales of it, right? Different levels of like how we're trying to approach it. For myself, I've been working since 2018, really focused on climate resiliency for vulnerability assessment for cultural resources. So my focus really looking at what's at risk for the cultural resources. And when I say cultural resources, not just archaeological or things that most people would gather like tangible, but things that's important to the tribe, right? Things in the native area, things in the environment that actually hold true to it. Even things that we were talking about, language to burial resources. A lot of it's all being impacted. So I think the first step we took was, well, how do we attack that? And so let's just see what's at risk. But a lot of this is a learning curve, right? We're trying to figure out where do we start. And for me, I just, I didn't know where to start. I didn't know as much, we all think we know about climate issues until you start getting into it. And then when you think, I'll have a conversation with you and I'm like, I just realized I knew nothing. So that's what I've come to the conclusion. Like, you just keep learning. Thankfully though, back in 2018, we were able to apply for a couple of BIA grants. And it gave me the opportunity to attend 2 camps, one in 2019 and one in 2022. And the first one was hosted by the Confederation Salish and Kootenai tribes at Flathead Lake, Montana. And, you go there and they really welcome you with open arms. I mean, the tribes up there from the Northwest. And then a lot of other folks from everywhere, you kind of start off with this idea of, I don't know where to begin. And they're comfortable with that. Some tribes have already had a climate plan for 5 years going for what they're looking for. For me, they're like, hey, it's okay to start from the beginning. Like, hey, let's see what you're going to go to. But I think this idea of what's very commonplace is tribal science, so to say, tribal knowledge, doing science like the way that tribes feel ethically, that makes sense to them, that captures everything that they would do in a traditional manner, and how to kind of wrap it all together. So a lot of that we came back, and I mean, we've all been through a lot of COVID issues. So coming out of traveling this summer, Jill, myself, Quentin, and Cody actually went up to the climate camp, held at the Penobscot, and by all the Wabanaki tribes were up there in the Northeast, and wanted to see where we're at a couple years later. And even for my own plan, it's like, all right, how far have we gotten? And I still, they have breakout sessions for like if you're beginning the budding to a leafing cohort where you're a lot more advanced. So we're somewhere in between. And I think with some of the things we've learned, it's learning that we're still on the right path and that our path is unique to ourselves. It doesn't have to be the way another tribe sees it or another organization would see it. So with that, we started putting it together and started really fleshing out. What you just have here is just a glimpse of what I've been working on with the team. And it's not just myself. It's a team of, we have our planning consultants, our environmental consultants from the Southeastern Climate Adaptation Science Center, the organization United Southeast and Eastern Tribes from USET, and many colleagues putting together a lot of information. Joe's helped out with this. A couple members from the community, Quentin himself has been working with me on this. And the idea is just trying to understand where do we start, right? And I think some of it is very precursory, right? You can't just assume that if we're going to give this out or we're going to talk about this with the community or we're going to talk about these with folks, that everyone knows what these issues are. And everyone just throws these terms out there and just assumes like, hey, you should already know what a vulnerability assessment is. No, that is the wrong place to start. And I think with that is just, you want people to really invest. You got to start at a real commonplace and then go from there. What are we going to do? Well, what is climate? What's the difference between climate and weather? That's one of the things I learned when I'm at the camps. We had multiple workshops where we went to a climate summit in Verona, New York, and was just breaking it down. Because I think just getting people to grasp that. And then even there, like Joe said, some of the things we're dealing with now, extreme heat. I mean, I've seen some statistics from Joe just showing us we're feeling the weather here. We're just walking through DC. It felt like we were melting in the concrete right there. And it's summer, but it just feels different. So just making sure that everyone kind of, where do we get to the bottom and then work our way up. And that's what we want to do with this is more of a very bottom up approach. I'm hoping to reach out more to the community and more to different folks to kind of get advice on where to go. So, we talk about our framework and what it is, where we want to start from dealing with issues in the different habitats. And we realized that, let's focus on downscaling it down to, let's focus on Big Cypress and Brighton, because a lot of our methodology can still be applied there. And then what do we see? So when we looked at that, we created different data sets and just like tables of just what's being impacted for our collections and our museum, what's being impacted in the archaeology, from sea level rise to saltwater intrusion. I think we had like 20 some odd different risks that and what levels they are, and gauge that it's also not uniform across the tribe. I think that's the one thing I've learned about setting up with that framework, that just assuming that we have for the Hollywood Reservation, sea level rise, and so, is a big issue over there. While to the cattlemen on Brighton, it might be drought and longer periods of drought. So when we were talking, I think one time we had a good chat with Quentin and I, we talked about, hey, it's one of the things that everyone assumes is just these big storms. We've always had big storms in Florida, right? Huge category 4s and 5. But we had that one summer where it was just the frequency of Cat 1s just back to back without a let up. How does that affect us? So it's really thinking about that. And I think with a lot of the data, and thanks to my colleagues from the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, providing a lot of the data for generalized habitats, and also knowing that a lot of the information we're capturing is, we're not ever trying to do anything where it would get into sensitive data or really going in further than we should, because that's not for me. That's not for ourselves too. That's for like carrying those conversations with like Quentin or elders or even folks of that community. It'd be different. So how they want to carry the conversation. The whole point is to get people to really like think about what they care about and then how to get that focus. And that's where we get into community engagement, because we looked at it and it's a multiple folds where you talk about how do you get the data and the science together. But for the tribe, it's actually traditional knowledge, getting feedback from the community, what they see, what's important to them, and introducing yeah, you might have seen it when it came out from a letter from the White House, indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, or ITEC. For us, is just having just a traditional conversation about what's important, and then just starting that, because we initiate that conversation and maybe it goes beyond us, or maybe it's further, but that's the integral part. So you see here where we actually had a day out with Cody, Jill, Quentin, and I with our culture advisor, one of our folks from the environmental team, just looking at one of the areas where there was a wildfire, and how hard the wildfire hit in that area and how infrequent and the damage it can do and the recovery, or how often we should have them, and then let it nature take its course. And then how do we help that facilitate that? So there's a lot of discussion about that, but I think the big part is actually tying in both, because not just for us, just having Western-based science with it, traditional ecological knowledge, then those two tie in together with policies at the tribe. I think that's where you take action to the things you're going to do. That's where things really set out. Because if not, then you're not going to have buy-in. You can have the world's greatest science, but if people don't believe in what you're doing, and it doesn't matter, it just sits there. And then you have to have people buying it. You need something to back it up. But then changing, and what does that really look like? And I think we're set forward in that way. And you can see by the, you think of it as, for lack of a better word, investment or time or spent on resources, but we spend that with, having the creation of our climate resiliency program, and then later off into having Dave and Quentin take folks to actually look at places that are really being impacted, like Egmont Key.
So I started with the tribe a little over 7 years ago. When I started, I was in the tribal archaeology section. So everybody here is an archaeologist. I've been there, and all the places I mentioned I worked before. If you work in South Florida, you can work anywhere in the world. This is one thing I've learned down there. If you can go out in the wetlands of South Florida and do archaeology, you are set everywhere else. So one of my main jobs now is I maintain the Seminole site file, the Tribal Register of Historic Places, which is it's a tribal mirror of National Register of sites that are of extreme importance. And this is a map we put together here of the ones that are on reservation, except for Sam Jones Trail, which is just off reservation, that are historically significant. And the Council Oak up top there is one of the ones I manage. It's also on the National Register of Historic Places. And as Juan mentioned, with all the hurricanes coming in, one of my jobs is to go and take a look at the Council Oak every time a hurricane is coming and just after to see what kind of damage has been done, what can be recovered. So we're keeping a look at all these sites, trying to figure out what's happening. We're seeing the climate change, the effects of it as it's happening. We're trying to monitor and go on. One of my main jobs, though, lately, especially when it comes to talking about when we're going out talking about traditional environmental knowledge, is decolonization of history. And Seminole history has been heavily impacted by colonizers. It's the first place, Florida's the first place in the United States that was colonized from outside. The Spanish came here in the 1500s, and it's been happening ever since. This has heavily affected not just Seminole history, but the way Seminole history is told. And the way it's been told for a long time has been to the advantage of occupying people. It doesn't match up with history of the tribe. So one of our main struggles is to go through, show the Seminole story, and find everything within the records to show, no, this is the truth, the story that's been out there for a long time. One of our major problems is that when it comes to ITech, environmental knowledge, the Seminole have incredible environmental knowledge of Florida, but the history has been told has divorced them completely from Florida. It's been told that they're just Creek who came down from the north. They're not actually from here. The United States has been here longer than they. And none of that's true. All the people of Florida are people who are ancestors of the Seminole tribe. There were survivors from the Spanish. There were people who joined together. Everyone came together basically in the Seminole War. It was a coalition of all these different separate people fighting back against invaders that brought everyone together. And Seminole became like the moniker to, it was placed on them from outside, but it became sort of a rallying cry. And that's the history we got to get out there when we're talking about environmental knowledge, that no, this applies here. What the tribe knows is Florida. Let's see. So coming to Egmont Key, one mentioned our work out there, and that's probably been the big one that we can talk about, that we can show people what's going on. And if you take a look at the top picture there, that was taken Egmont Key. I think that is Quentin from the back there. I gotta be careful. I just noticed this coming up here. I'm gonna blind you all.
Yeah, that was before I cut my hair.
But that cutoff, when I first went out to Egmont Key in 2016, that cutoff wasn't there in the sand. We're gonna come in. This was after, not Michael, this was after. This is 2017, I believe, and there's just this direct cut going down. You can see the whole thing. Now it's all down at the level of the sand at the bottom. We're seeing the steady erosion happening on the island pretty much every day, every week. It's slowly disappearing, and the major question has been, should it be stopped? Can it be stopped? How expensive is it to stop? Because that's one of the main things it always comes down to. Down here, we got to go out there. We got to do an environmental survey of the area. This is actually Victoria, who is now with Big Cypress National Preserve. We went out there because Egmont Key is a major historic site, not because of the ancestral time period, but during the Seminole War, in the last phases of it, the Army they were capturing basically the families of the soldiers. They shifted strategies from attacking soldiers to go into the camps, capturing the families. They took them out to this island to what is effectively a concentration camp, held them there, and sent out notices to the warrior groups that your family's being held here. They're going to be shipped to Oklahoma. If you want to be with your family, you should surrender and go with them. This was an effective strategy. It's one that doesn't get talked about much because obvious reasons, really. It's something America's never really bragged much about. It's come out now because decolonization has become a major topic that people have been working towards. Unfortunately, it's also getting major pushback now. And Florida is leading the charge in that pushback. So the fight's still going on, and we're trying to maintain as best we can.
Yeah, I kind of want to add a little bit to that, the erosion of the island. Yeah, the storms, these bigger storms and more frequent rain events and stuff are a cause of that. But one of the other causes to that island eroding as quickly as it is because of man-made structures. So what is it called? The
Channel.
Tampa Bay, yeah, the channel right there, since it was widened and, I don't know if they dredged it. I mean,
Dredging, yeah, they're dredging it all the
right?
time.
yeah, so, they're constantly dredging it. Well, that island never eroded in the past because the sand that came out from there was constantly, replenishing the island. So you also got to consider, man-made things. Like, for example, in Big Cypress right now, there's, quote unquote, a bear problem or a panther problem. It's not necessarily a problem. What it is they're moving in because they got nowhere else to move to. I mean, every time I come up to, I used to come up to Fort Myers because it was a lot easier than going to Hollywood. And where I live, right in between, I'm about the same distance between the two to get groceries because there's no groceries out on the reservation. But when I come up this way in the past, I used to pass through woods and stuff all the time. Now I'm passing through gated communities. There's a Publix, there's a 7-Eleven, there's a Dollar General now. All that stuff is there. I'm only 27. So the fact that I've been able to see that within the past like 10 years of my life, that's a big problem. All this construction, all the building and putting all this stuff here is not helping whenever it comes to trying to save the climate. Man-made structures, that's one of the biggest issues. And it's only going to make things harder in the future, trying to reverse things. At this point, there's no reversing anything. So just want to add that in.
Hold your go.
So,
What's that?
It's your
yeah,
go.
here's our contact information, but obviously we have plenty of time for conversation now, but just wanted to make sure that was available for anyone that wanted it. And just so many good points made. I mean, the fact that Juan is leading the charge with a vulnerability assessment, this is our first department to do that. And I think it's really appropriate that the cultural resources are looked at first. But there's lots of different aspects that we need to do that for, right? And that, when it comes to environment, it's not extractive. They're not resources, they're relatives, right? So it's a completely different way of looking at things. And I think a lot of our departments are going to be excited about eventually following Juan's footsteps and looking at a vulnerability assessment that is appropriate for the tribe, right? And I look forward to helping kind of shepherd that along as well, in any way that I can. And also Egmont Key, I mean, an absolutely beautiful place with so much painful history there, being destroyed, both naturally and because of man-made causes, and the struggle of that because of the media and the politics going on right now about retelling history in an appropriate way and making sure all voices are heard. We need everyone's help on that one, So, but I don't know if anybody else wanted to summarize a little bit how we're all connected, but I think it'll come through questions if anybody has questions about our programs or some of the things that we mentioned. We have time, right? Okay.
Yep.
Online as well.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for that presentation. I was wondering about, I think, Juan, I think you said it, no matter how much good science we have, it doesn't matter until we enact it in policy, right? Part of that is education of our communities, all of our communities, and part of that is talking to policymakers. I'm thinking about the geographic location of the Seminole tribe's lands in Florida and how much hydrological alteration we have done to the southern part of the state, and how you tease out, when you're doing your educational programs, how you tease out the effect of man-made or human changes to our hydrological cycle and how we're trying to fix it now, as opposed to things that are happening because of climate change. The environment of the Everglades Restoration Program, all of the ditching and berming they're doing with that program is moving water a lot, you know, and obviously water is moving in different ways because of climate change. So how do you speak to your community or any community about the difference between what you're seeing and what's related to climate change as opposed to what's related to hydrological cycle movement because of what we're doing to fix things?
I could touch on that a little bit. I think as being, well, one, when talking with the community about that, I mean, that's a very active discussion that's been going on for a long time, even before I was doing it. I think realizing that it's not one and separate for the community, they see it all in the same. They see the movement of water, how the land is being, in some cases, manipulated to meet, I guess, certain like stakeholders. You know, sometimes you'll see things on the East Coast or north of Lake Okeechobee or something. Certain, just for examples. And for the community, it's one of the things like you see that they manipulate, like they've been here for a long time. Why certain things should be taken care of or cared for or put in their, I guess, in the forefront. And I think it's very active because some of those things are not being kept in the forefront, or they're being meant for to deal with other issues. So I mean, we have a very active particularly dealing with some of the different federal agencies. I'm thinking of like when we deal with like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You know, we have a lot of discussions with them, and that's why we have tribal consultation. I think that's a big thing for us, and that's a big how we deal with a lot of the cultural resources and things for particularly what I work in is how to deal with those things that are at risk and making sure that we know we have a voice. And we've done that for a long time. Before we had staff from Victoria used to work with us and do compliance to now we have our current staff, our compliance review supervisor, really just addressing the tribe's concerns. And then when it comes to consultation, we're telling these folks that, hey, no, the tribe's here. It's a sovereign nation. You have to respect tribal sovereignty. So you're going to discuss with us on how these issues are going to go forward with us as part of the table. We're part of the discussion. And, you know, some of those discussions take a long time, right? You know, some of them can even take a decade or more. But I think it takes the time it needs. It can't be rushed because we got to convey that information back to the community back and forth. We have to convey what's going on and seeing what can we do to kind of help with those discussions or, you know, pass along their concerns and then how they want to see it forth in their own community with tribal council, tribal leadership, then they have those discussions at that level. So, you know, when it comes to those policies and decision making, then they make that and they discuss it with them. And I think it's always intertwined. So, you know, you have a little bit of both. I'm hopefully answering the question. But yeah, I think we try to make that effort. And I think having Quentin there really has helped with that conversation because it's not just speaking on government to government consultation, but when we convey that back to the community, how do we do that where it makes sense to everybody or not talking down to folks? You know, it's always like, hey, like let's have, I'm not speaking at people. I'm having a conversation with them and I'm saying, hey, this is what's going on. And, you know, some of those, you have a lot of activists in the community as well, advocates that know the issues better than ourselves because that's what they do, you know, every day. So yeah, I think it's really heavy engagement, but I think we try every day with that.
Yeah, I would agree. It's that's like you hit the nail like right on the head. Like that's the daily thing that tribal members remember and know in context where other agencies just kind of are, you know, thinking a little bit more quickly and about all the users and whatever, and, you know, the budget and the time frame. And it's like, no, tribal members see this is part of the ongoing discrimination and colonization. And it's like that pressure, development pressure, water rights pressures, all the different pressures that are going on. That's part of that continuum that's felt daily and that it's still being felt. Right. So that struggle is very much real. Yeah, it's how we fight for the sovereignty of the tribe, you know, is through policies like that and discussions and partnerships and having a seat at the table to have those conversations. Yeah. Yeah, Mike.
Thanks. Great panel conversation. I think this is, can you hear me through the mic? Yes, I can hear myself. I think this is a follow-up to Anissa's question. I guess the question I wanted to ask was, how receptive is the tribal council to talking about climate change and dealing with the problems associated with climate change? And then maybe the second part of the question might just reveal my ignorance. I'm assuming tribal members have a better sense of time and nature and appreciate the kinds of problems that need to be addressed that have long-term consequences, while maybe our Western governments, our jurisdictions, have a very difficult time. People in elected office at the city and county levels have a difficult time focusing on something that's long-term. And so what I find in my experience is that it's difficult to get city councils and county commissioners focused on that long-term problem. So again, that's a little bit of a ramble there, but do you see that different cultural background as being helpful? And is the tribal council engaged in this in the here and now?
Absolutely. Good question, Mike. So because of the pandemic, things are moving a little bit slower than I would like, but that's okay. Things take the time they take. So I haven't put a lot of MOUs or referendums or anything to the council yet, for specific policy statements. But creating the program, I think, is a huge step forward, showing their leadership on climate change, just to even create this program. They've been incredibly supportive of the vulnerability assessments or any types of projects, water planning. The only council action that I've asked for was to join the Southwest Regional Coalition, which they signed immediately. So I think every time that I do have an ask, it's been very positive. We've had great representation at some of the events that I was showing you as well. The Gathering Fire and different events that we've had, Earth Day, we have good turnout, we have good conversations individually that way. But as far as formal resolutions, that's the only one that I've had to pass so far. But I do think there is support. We need to get to the point where we're having more, I guess, formal meetings on some of these topics. We have a water commission that meets regularly. We have an energy committee that, meets semi-regularly. The food sovereignty work group is not formal, it's open. So there's different layers of conversations that are happening. As far as timeframes are concerned, I do hear you about the short, medium, and long range. And what I would have to say is that when I survey tribal members I'm dedicated to do all three, right? To address immediate, midterm, and long range planning. Tribal members were most interested in immediate impacts and long-term impacts. Long-term talking 7 generations, which is much farther than other local governments are willing to look. The longest that I've been able to do long-term planning in the past in Southeast Florida was 50 years. And really had to push every 10 years to make sure that we were keeping up to that 50-year mark, right? That we weren't sliding. So that's as far as we were able to go. Where the Dutch, obviously are able to do, I think, 200 to 500 years, obviously not with projections, but with planning. So I do think there is precedent for that, and that tribes are probably the first in North America that are going to be able to do that kind of long range planning. And that's what I'm looking forward to. But like any community, we got to look at the immediate impacts as well. And I'm trying to blend into the program midterm as well. That seems to be the least sexy thing. Nobody wants to talk about midterm planning, but that's where you're really looking at, building lifespans and other aspects of investments that are critical as well. So I'm trying to hit all three. Obviously, immediate and long-term is of importance to the tribe, where for most local governments it's probably only immediate. And I know that hill, that struggle that you're talking about.
And then from the tribal member point of view, I have to figure out how to say this without sounding like I'm complaining. But there's a bunch of moving components within our tribe. We're the Tribal Historic Preservation and Environmental Resource Department. So we care about the environment, and that's like our main focus, protecting and preserving what we have. But then we also got another department that has a lot to do with like that type of stuff, tribal community development. And like I said, one of the main issues that's not aiding in, climate resiliency is development. And that's one thing I think we're trying to do is get our, not so much trying to get our council to be on the same page as us, but trying to get our other department, our tribal community development department, to be on the same page as us. Because like Jill was saying, everything's about timelines. We got to build this now. We got to build this, here, and we got to build it big. But I was talking to one of our environmental resource department ladies about the whole bear situation, and one of the main things was like, well, they're only moving on to the reservation because that's the place that they can move to where everything looks natural still. Well, that may not be the case in 50 years from now if our tribal community development department wants to keep, building these big cities or these gated communities like I'm seeing coming up here towards Fort Myers down a Corkscrew, all those big communities being put down. I mean, to me, I think that's where a lot of those bears are coming from. There was a lot of space. Like I remember, seeing deer there all the time. And then after they cleared out some 100 acres, seeing the deer walk around in a field of dirt. Those deer used to go through there all the time and, eat whatever was through there. But now it's just dirt. Now everything's moving out towards us. So yeah, I think that's one of the issues that we kind of do have. So not so much getting council to be receptive to us, but getting this other moving component to be on board with what we're doing as well. Because, when it comes to climate resiliency, a lot of stuff is like, long-term stuff, and they want things like here and now. So that's my perspective on it.
I think just to add to both of them, like you see that investment there, like we're here today, right? I think you see that us being here, dedicating and set aside some of the cultural climate issues, what I've been working on. Even predecessor to a lot of that was, I know our senior director for the Heritage Environmental Resources Department, many of you probably know Dr. Paul Backhouse. He went to an energy conference hosted by council. They actually wanted to discuss how to deal with energy issues. And that's where the whole idea of climate resiliency, where do we start with that, to where create an department like Jill's department to go through there, and I think it's a slow moving wheel, so to say, and things like, a global pandemic kind of slows everything down with that, when it comes to priority of issues and but it's still moving. I think that's the key, because that's where they're having even conversations to just point like long versus short-term range plan. What can we do immediately? What can you all find out now? The regional compact groups, both Southeast, Southwest, like where do we fit in there? And then updating council when we do have that chance. I know recently they had discussions, budget discussions about moving towards an electric fleet at some point in the near future. Like the discussions are active, and I think it's also part one and the same to a little bit on the other part. It's also one and the same with the community. Sometimes when you talk about cultural resources and environment or how we're dealing with it, like development, it's all not one, and it's not all so separate or categorized or its own little neat little box. It's all interrelated. And so some of those discussions are like what Quentin was talking about with they're like updating our departments, or how do we get them to recognize that? And then there's recent areas in Immokalee that we're trying to get a historical, and council sees the value to having that historically preserved. That's something we've always talked about with how do we share that knowledge, or Egmont Key, and actually getting folks from the tribal community to head up there. So it's just, I guess, a different, I think how we started off with this, just different scales to it, and then just different speeds for each of it, and then what takes priority over the other, and then trying to how to get everyone else on board. It's going to take the time, because it's not just council, so it's all of tribal government. So some of the departments, like myself working with Joe, move a little bit faster or more prioritize it, and then others not as much. But I think the goal is eventually to get everyone there.
Yeah, like any organization, some departments are still very much in their lane and their silo, and others, like the ones here in the Heritage and Environmental Resources, are integrated.
And I think council is very supportive of that integrated approach, and they understand that. So it's just kind of catching the other departments up and having them understand the interconnected nature of our work. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I'm moderating the online discussion. So I just wanted to know that in addition to all the people that are here in the room, we have about 26 participants online. So from Pittsburgh, from the Palm Beach County Office of Resilience, from Santa Fe, New Mexico, Miami-Dade Historic Preservation, Greenville, North Carolina, Apalachicola, Gainesville, Florida Museum of Natural History, and Austin, Texas. So I won't read all 26, but those are some of the highlights. So I just wanted you all to know that we have so many online participants as well. And I was very interested in, Jill, what you said about a vulnerability assessment. And I know that we'll be talking a little bit about vulnerability assessments after the break. And I was wondering if you could, I know you spoke a little bit about the timeline, but if you all could maybe comment on what the other concerns that the tribe might have that are different than, say, like the city of Naples when they prepare that type of assessment.
Do you want to take that one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Um,
It's Juan's vulnerability assessment. He's lead on the project, so I'm going to let him.
Well, when it comes to vulnerability assessment, I think something that look at, I guess, now you got me thinking, Sarah. It's like, oh, now everybody from everywhere is listening to us. Oh, great. Hello, world.
Come on, Juan, we just got back from the climate
Yeah,
camp.
no, I think when we look at that, we have to see what fits the tribe. And it does take into other factors that are, and we've seen that with many tribes, right? I think when you look at certain things, it's not just, I think Jill said it best, it's not just a resource. Like the tribe sees it as relatives. Like if you look at every other tribe, they see it as like how they're in harmony with the environment. And it's not just take or preserve. So eventually later I can take. It's like it's together and working together for the future of the tribe and what's important. So certain things that, the tribe will look at would be, I think just one of the things we talk about is maintaining the land to where it once was, and maintaining it so the future youth can actually utilize that land the way they could. I mean, it's hard to say, but one of the issues, I mean, I went fishing with one of my friends that lives on the reservation, and then one of the things we said, like, oh, we grab the fish and like, oh, don't hold on to that, so like, oh, don't eat it, or like, why I had like sores on it, and it's like before they used to eat the fish right out the Everglades, and now you can't do that anymore. I remember someone mentioned that they did a study a while back, and that you're actually from the Everglades, you're allowed to eat like one fish a month if you found a good fish because of the levels of mercury, and I think it's like it's seeing the land and how to utilize it, and it gives back and forth. So it's like trying to preserve and save what you could. Some of the areas where it has habitats that are still used for traditional practices and traditional use. And some of that is keeping up and preserving that. How do we make sure that certain things are dry periods, or it's getting enough, not just water, when I say water, but clean, good water, not just dirty water from different parts of Florida, but because a lot of the different plants say need that. But like it's weird because it's like, life will find a way, they'll find and adapt and change that. And I think what the vulnerability assessment leads into next is our version of the adaptation plan. What we've learned is I want to work towards eventually like a tribal climate resilience menu, so to say. We saw one of our colleagues from in Michigan, their tribes up there created a tribal adaptation menu, which actually gives the tribe and the community the ability to work with different departments to pick and choose how to adapt or how to approach a different climate issue. Whether you let something pass because it needs to occur, something needs to adapt and change towards it, or something where you're like, all right, now I have to relocate and find other resources for this, or how to deal with this issue. So, or deal with it head on. So it gives an opportunity to do that. And I think that's where we want to build our vulnerability assessment there. And I think that's where it kind of differs from, like, say, the city of Naples, like, oh, how do we do it? It's not just the residents there, but the residents, but the future residents, or the youth, or the ones that have yet to live, that will eventually be caretakers and stewards of the land. And then how do you kind of set up and preserve for them for um, traditional life ways to, and when I say that, it's not just like what people want to hear, like, oh, ceremony, like, no, traditional, like, even like language, right? Is one of the big things we talk in the vulnerability assessment. I think we talked about that up north. The way people see language and descriptors of the land changes. What once was named, the name for say, like, Lake Okeechobee, and what it meant if, say, hypothetically, in some parallel universe, the lake disappeared, who would know what the name of the land is? They just call it, after the next local mayor of, that town, while, like, the community would name it after something that was a descriptor of the land, that it was, the water source, or, like, big water, and not to get into specifics, but identifying of how they describe the land. And I think that's where it's key, where the tribe is still trying to do that, and not just our tribe. Always learned that many tribes do that the describing the land or describing the use, and, like, that's the more valuable part, because it shows where you're gonna show the future, future kids, future youth, what the land looks like.
Yeah, to add on to that a little bit, what you're yeah, if the water from Lake Okeechobee went away, the name could possibly change. But when you see the name being called Lake Okeechobee, Okeechobee means big water. So it just means lake. So when you say the name, you're saying lake. So the lake is, yeah, it's repetitive. Sounds funny. But when I would say when, because it's, currently pretty empty right now compared to what it used to look like. In the future, people are going to be looking at it like, hey, why is it named Big Water? And there's no water in it. So the language describes how land looked or used to look. You look at how do you say it in English? Pahokee. You look at Pahokee, that's Pahayoget, and that's like means pine forest. And if there's no pine trees there in the future, well, now Pahayoget or Pahokee, that's a description of what the land used to look like. I mean, if you look all around Florida, Hialeah, it's pronounced Hialeah. And that, I think that one, I believe, was Everglades. And Kahialet and Hialeah both mean Everglades. And what do you see in Hialeah now? Nothing but concrete jungles. Where's the Everglades at over there? There's like some shrubs in front of fancy offices, but that's all you're going to see. You go to, I haven't been to Pahokee, can't say, I'm losing the English word. Pahokee,
okay.
And you go over there and just pine trees now. I haven't been there in a while. I'm sure there's pine trees everywhere still, but if that's all wiped out, well, now it's just a name, so these names are important. I feel they're to the outside world, not just to us, but to the outside world, because it lets us know how the lands used to look, and it lets us know what we need to keep doing to these places that still have the names that describe how they still look. We
Yeah.
got to make sure they stay looking that way, if not prettier.
Yeah, I would say that it's interesting, the question of like how a vulnerability assessment would be different for the tribe versus like a coastal city. Having worked for coastal cities before, working for the tribe, and as different as the tribe is, that it has so many different reservations across Florida and different communities and needs, there is like a underlying value system, like one community, one heart, that is like a reference point that you come back to, where when you're trying to figure out like a vulnerability assessment or a climate adaptation plan for a city, it's like, well, who are the residents? Like the residents today, the businesses today, the residents or the businesses of tomorrow. Is it about the tax base? Is it about like foreign investors? Like, what is it about? Is it about the current political structure and preserving that certain like hierarchy? Or, you know what I mean? So that's the hard part as staff, is trying to identify and maybe influence in any way what that value system is that you're planning for. when sometimes you don't have control over that, right? So that's the thing that I think everyone can try to switch in their mindset and work together to get back to that, like there's this like underlying healthy ecosystem and community of the future that we can all try to work towards, regardless of where we live now or where we'll live in the future. But that if we have that kind of like holistic thinking about what we want for future generations and what we want for our relationships with each other and with the land, then we can make good decisions, right? Regardless of what might happen in the future or where we might be or where our children might be. So I think having the place-based names like the really helps us to kind of see in the past and understand the land a little bit better, and might help us also kind of get to that more holistic future where we're thinking in that way. I just came back from vacation in Ireland. I haven't shown the guys the pictures yet, but it was so hard to read the street signs because everything is in the native language first. And like when there's only room on the sign for one language, they choose the Gaelic. Okay, so it was fascinating. I had no idea that I'd have trouble with language in Ireland, right? But that's a really strong commitment to preserving their culture and their history and keeping it alive. And I think that's fascinating. Like how much more, I grew up in Florida. I was born here. I'm first generation, of course, like I'm not multi-generational, but I consider myself a Floridian. How much better would I understand Florida if things were named that in a way that made sense to the land and that I understood that context, right? I think it would benefit everybody.
Good morning, Sarah Miller, and I'm really grateful that you're here this morning and for the tribe's continued support of Tidally United and in bringing us all together. I had a recent conversation with Dave about site stewardship and a topic of great interest, and looking at different site stewardship programs out west, and it'll come up in my talk in a little bit, but the awareness that really the first site stewardship programs are the Indigenous and Native experiences of going back and revisiting places. And that's such an intimate and it's hard to get our scouts to go back to the same place a lot, and they don't have that connection. So I just wanted to ask a question of how in braiding the sweetgrass, since monitoring is such a part of assessments and studies and contributing to what we know of what the changing environment is scientifically, but that other really important piece of weaving the education and the tribal knowledge that is passed down of why these places are important. And I think archaeologists, we start to think so site specific. We're not thinking about the holistic environment. So I've really appreciated the comments this morning and about the place names, and it's all such a part of a wider landscape. But just seeing if the panelists had anything to say about, how to marry that scientific monitoring and assessment and looking at threats with what is a very different approach to repeat visits to sites and changes seen over time.
You want to talk about that one, Keith?
Dave.
So the site stewardship with the tribe is, we did talk specifically about some programs out west, and a lot of those are interactive with local government and such, and there really hasn't been that relationship for the Seminole tribe. It's been generally more protective of a lot of the sites. The tribal register map that I showed, that's like the big major ones we have. That's not even, it's publicly available, but it's not really like published, put out there for people. There's more worry about people coming, and like the more people who know about them come and visit them will cause problems. Just for regular tourism, looters are always a problem. We're working up a tribal monitoring program now, which is going through the tribal archaeology section for tribal members to basically learn how to do monitoring of sites, to go visit them, what's important, make sure they're okay. The biggest site that we probably have that we're doing work on consistently is Egmont Key. And there, we're lucky enough to be working with Fish and Wildlife. We're working with the state park system. We're working with the Egmont Key Alliance. I saw Richard Sanchez had a name tag downstairs. I don't know if he's here though.
No.
Richard's at Egmont right now fixing doors. He sent cards.
He was painting them last time.
Yeah, fixing more doors.
Hopefully different ones. And that's one of the first, that's almost a test bed for doing these wider actions to monitor sites, see what's going on, make sure they're safe. But building those relationships is kind of an ongoing process.
I think to Dave's point, we talk about site stewardship. I think it's seeing. I think there's levels to it too, and seeing what is the concern and what the community wants to see out of it. I think right now what they've been doing with Egmont Key has been wonderful, and it's really created a conversation. It's something that I guess like into for better lack of a better word, like a Seminole like concentration camp, a really dark place in history. Do you preserve that, or do you let nature take its course and like wash it away and just to capture that? It's not us for us to kind of decide that. The communities decide that, but that's why they go out there and visit. They're like, hey, they pose that question to each other. They pose it to the youth. I mean, I think since what 2018, 2017, like you said, 2017, when we first went out there, we've taken so many different members of the tribal communities, different folks voicing it, and I think that stewardship with good partners matters. I think we've worked with a lot of different folks. I know with the folks at USF and Brooke and everyone have helped us. Like, hey, how do we capture some of the things with using technology? Like, can we laser scan the island? How do we capture that there? Say if nothing's there to tell, how do we continue telling that story? Working with Dave on sharing that history and sharing it with the youth, sharing that. I think it's that ongoing story that keeps it alive. And I think that's what makes it more unique for the tribe, right? Because I think if you think about it, the way histories are told is through stories, but through those stories carry a lot of truth, a lot of history, a lot of family, a lot of knowledge. So this is part of that. And I think we see that through a lot of other sites. And then some of it's not very just site specific. It's more like the broader context of it. There's several site locations on the Big Cypress Reservation that are in the area we just call the native area. And that whole area is really preserved very differently. And I think a lot of the community knows it better than we are. They're there every day. They go to it over there. I mean, Quentin can speak to it better, like going out there all the time and seeing like, hey, the sites we need to preserve. It's not just site specific, but the entire community. Why? Because we're gonna have to bring our kids here. Let's see if we can set up like the Foshke school has different and that's the school on the reservation, different classes where they teach kids about gardening and everything. All right, now let's take you to where it would actually happen, where that carries on forward. So it's this bigger, like when it comes to stewardship, it's not just really focused, it's a more holistic, broader context because it actually has tangible things that are going to hit them when they get older.
And one of the main things I've gotten with talking with tribal members about Egmont Key is, again, a great example, because one of the questions that was put to us when we first started working there was, do we want to preserve this island? Do we want to try to save it so it will still be here? And going in, I think we thought the answer for a lot of people would be yes, and that ended up not being true. A lot of people had the view that nature's taking it away. That's not a bad thing, but preserve the story. Make sure the story goes on, is told. Don't lose that. We almost lost it completely, and we want to make sure that goes on. It's a story of struggle and survival. It's very important, and that goes to a larger, I think, understanding of the difference between regular changes in the environment over time and ones that are caused by people. And regular changes over time are a natural thing. They happen. That's not something to stop. You don't try to lock a place in time. That's just not how things work. You can't lock a place, you can't lock people in time. But you're not supposed to, if the changes are coming from outside, it's people doing it, that's a different thing. Stop that, try to keep it, preserve it the way it should be, not the way it was, the way it should be.
Yeah, I think one of the more like random relationships we built out of that I think we don't talk about enough is we got relationships with the universities and stuff, But now we got a good relationship with the ferry folk, the people who take the ferries out there. And I think that's so cool because I've heard them take other groups out while we're waiting and they start talking about the history, everything that we've talked to them about we use the same people almost all the time. So now we've built a relationship with them. So now they're helping spread that word, about the things that we're doing and working on out there, the history of the tribe. So that aspect of things I think is pretty cool.
I take credit for the fairy folk reference.
Good job.
The ferry
I
people.
was working with them all the time, and that just saying it like that, I think makes my Irish grandmother very happy.
Good job, Dave.
So a question right over here.
Oh, I actually have a question from the chat. So, so this is all the people online that are watching this. So this comes from Jesse Schneider at the University of Miami, and he's wondering, what do you see as the most significant cultural barrier to doing your work?
Repeat that again. I didn't hear it.
What do you see? Sorry. What do you see as the most significant cultural current barrier to your work? Sorry, current, not cultural. So what do you see as the most current barrier to your work?
Oh, if it was cultural, there's a whole other issue.
No, I'm sorry. That is a whole other issue. Sorry, that was my that was a Freudian slip on my part. Yeah. So what do you see as the most current barrier to your work?
Current barrier to our work.
Ever see Juan Jill?
I would say time. I want everything done yesterday. When it comes to climate change, we should have acted yesterday, but we have to slow things down and do things better. Sometimes the right answer takes longer. And so I think learning how to manage time or be managed by time to get to the right place. Yeah, I think it's the circular nature of time. That's where I'm aiming. The linear has been my barrier.
I'll add to Jill's time. 'Cause that time for me is a big issue. I think for me, the biggest barrier is like, how do we convey what we're doing to an entire community that do have these concerns, right? Some of them may not see it the same way. Some of them may see the climate issues very much focused or not. So, everyone has the different ideas or beliefs about it. But for them, they know what hits them different. And I think, how do I convey all this information, all what we're trying to figure out, and make it fit for what their daily lives are? I used that example earlier. It's a very true one. Folks in the Hollywood community in the city, they're going to see a very different issue. And I'm not going to talk to them about, like drought or any, we could, but if their big concern is like, no, I want to talk about sea level rise, why would I jump to a conversation about cattlemen from Big Cypress and they want to talk about the drought affecting their cattle? They're like, yeah, sea level rise coming. Yeah, I get that one, but this is the issue I'm dealing with at hand. So I'm creating that space for everyone to kind of convey that information and capturing that space all together. That's, for me, I think the hard part with time on top of so we're just probably add to all our
Time,
issues. They'll just add,
space.
and at the end, you'll have your true answer, which is all of our issues.
Don't forget the biggest one, politics.
Yeah.
I would say that cultural probably is, I think, the biggest problem going on. It's just getting people to even be aware of the tribe and their input. There's been so much erasure done that getting around that is hard enough as it is. The fact that we have people going up to Washington is amazing. And we hope this continues. That can, of course, change completely in the next election. We don't know what's going to happen.
We invited them down. They're coming down now.
That's awesome. But there's been a lot of erasure, and that erasure has been to a purpose, which is to move people out of the way. When I went and did Section 106 training, we were sent to go do that when I was an archaeologist with the tribe, and there were other Florida State employees there, and not knowing who we were, I remember one of the DOT people, Department of Transportation people, just said he feels like the only reason the Seminole tribe exists is to stop road projects.
Wow.
And we're sitting right behind him like, and we heard other things like that up there. So just getting the interaction and the awareness is a major issue that's thankfully changing.
Yeah, awareness is one of the biggest ones.
But that's the hard part with white privilege, right? I mean, it's the water that the fish don't see, like it's everywhere. It is the system. So it's like people in their job, in their lane are not going to see that them sticking in their lane is hurting others because they don't have the context, they don't have the history, and that erasure serves them to that, not staying ignorant serves them. So it's difficult to push against that. It is the politics.
I have a, oh,
Okay.
okay, I appreciate it. So I have a question. So I wanted to ask about the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, NACRA. So we're talking about heritage at risk, we're talking about climate change. So in your experience, how has climate change impacted the process of getting your ancestors and ancestral objects back to the tribe and the community?
Let me take that. Yeah. I got you, Dave.
Got it, Juan.
That's a very serious question, and I think it requires, from us, the most serious attention we can provide to it. I think that's the number one thing that our office is trying to achieve. Led at the helm by our director for the TIPO, Tina Osceola. I know she wishes she could be here today, and that she'd be that person that could really hit that. And for our office, but we're all in the same mission, which is to try to get the ancestors back to where they belong, laid to rest in a proper way. And I think climate issues impact that very heavily because a lot of people don't weigh that as much as they should, or value it as just like they think of it as a burial resource. They use that burial resources, so that means it has a monetization value to it, or there's a certain amount to it. And no, it's people's families, it's people's ancestors. People can recall back to their grandparents, knowing where they passed away in certain areas. And I think that needs to be considered very heavily. I think there's a lot of things going around that are impacting that. And where does that lie into the factor where for the tribe, it's the number one thing that should be considered, one of the number one things that should be considered when we talk about huge land development projects. And when you talk to other agencies, it's almost like the last thing, right? And then where they weigh that in. We've had several projects where we deal with, and it's like, how do we get them to understand that it's not just an issue where if we were talking about a flooding project that would impact flooding Arlington Cemetery right now, do you know the uproar that it would cause? Do you know the amount of people and money, and CNN would be all over it, and they're like, oh, who's not doing nothing about this? Look at this. And then it becomes a bipartisan issue, and then people are like, no, you're not doing enough. You're like that. Like the attention is there. Well, that's the tribe too. And it's only their right and an inherent right, is particularly in Florida, when it comes to the first people being here, and for when we say thousands of years, where their ancestors are not just something long and forgotten, but they're still remembered in their stories and their histories. And that's not just stories like talking about someone's grandparents. They need to be considered as respectfully as anyone else would want theirs to consider. They need to be considered too. So when we talk about climate issues, that has a very large impact. When people talk about building seawalls and everything, they need to consider that. When they talk about restoration projects, we're restoring it for who? For everyone else but the people that live there. Restoring it for the people that, like I said, if it was somewhere where someone considered a national landmark, well, for the tribe, this is something more than that. It's not just a landmark, it's people's family. And if we consider one of our most important things in our lives is family, then how could you not consider that and put it at the forefront? But I think that's the biggest issue we face from there, because it's not considered in the forefront, and it still needs to be. And, I think that's for our office. We have a huge area led by, like I said, Tina, my colleague, Dominique DeBobian, leading that charge, but they know that they have a lot of other issues and fronts going forward with that, and climate affects that very heavily. So
Yeah, and I want to kind of add a couple of things to that. So one of the biggest problems with that is when we deal with like the Army Corps folks like that, a lot of the times they just don't get it. They don't get, what we try to tell them. Like, in our culture, we say whenever we pass, we go over to the spirit world, right? And our ancestor needs to stay there, stay where they are. You're able to still be connected in a spiritual way. So I want to bring this one up because it's the funniest thing I've ever heard. So there's a site that's being talked about being flooded, and we're trying to let the people know our issue with that. Hey, don't flood the site. There's no reason to do that. We gave you plenty of other options that could help you avoid the site. And one of their solutions that they suggested was, well, is there a way we can put a tube down into the ground directly over their grave to be like some type of spirit hole?
What?
I have to draw this. They gave us, they pitched something about basically like putting a cement cap over the burial resource, going down there, building this up, and then flooding the area around it. And it came from Paul. He's like, hey, Dave, you can draw. Can you draw what this would look like as a, I'm like, I can, but what the heck are you talking about?
Spirit tube. It's essentially what it was. Yeah. And, Tina and I sat face to face with the Army Corps headquarters and face to face with who are the ones currently holding our ancestors?
Oh, National Museum of Natural History.
Yeah. Okay. We sat face to face with them. We tell them, so the Army Corps obviously is the cause of our ancestors being picked up and then moved. And then they're going to the NMNH, right? NMNH, natural, whatever, so many acronyms, going over there. And then when we try to get our ancestors back, they didn't want to give them back to us. So, we sat there and we told them, well, these are our ancestors. They're like they are our grandmothers and grandfathers. Shouldn't we have the right to say where they go? And this was their response. Their response was, oh, yes, very much. This is your ancestors. You guys have all the right in the world to say where they go. But we got researchers from all around the world to come and study them for the greater of mankind. But yes, you guys do have all to say. Like, how are you going to tell us that? And then still say, no, you can't have them because we got people from Europe or wherever to come and research them. So that's what I mean by they just don't get it. They just don't understand. Quite frankly, they don't want to understand.
Getting them to understand that was a fight to begin with. Getting them to even admit that these are ancestors. They've tried for the longest times, like, no, these are Calusa. Yes, they are. Who are ancestors of the tribe.
Yeah.
No.
But obviously, in history books, it says that we weren't here because somebody was told, hey, go scout out Florida. They stepped a couple of feet in, peeked out and said, no, I don't see no Indians.
And to add to that is this issue of, if you respect the people that are there, you're respecting also the land that's there for them, and not just changing it to the will of man-made issues, right? It's easy to just get rid of that for folks on the outside and then do what they want with the land. And to Dave's point of erasure, I mean, you couldn't get any more colonialistic than removing people off the land and removing their ancestors from there. To say no one was here, what are you talking about? To remove that from there, even if there are climate issues and things that cause that, things where, yes, we understand there's an issue with water, but you have different alternatives to that. Yeah, there's issues with, we've heard it from fracking, oil, cleaning the algae to everything, right? But there's like the people who are here, they've been dealing with this for a long time. How about you come to the table? How come you don't invite the tribe to say, hey, this is where it's being led to, or to like Quinta's point, oh, let's take them to study them at universities, and like, oh, this insight's being impacted is going to be demolished. Well, no one will remember that, and a lot of the information is lost. And I think that's the point. So that to their point is like, it's not just something to be erased. Erasing people from the land is one of the easiest ways to try to get to a means to an end in a very colonialistic way. And I think that is something we're dead set against. That's why we continue with our No More Stolen Ancestors program from different, whether it be the issues we're fighting with the Smithsonian to issues we're fighting locally here with, pick X agency to whatever. But I think that's where we want to keep pushing that to the forefront, because we know it's something that's going to keep going. And it's been going on since, people landed here to still going on to today. So.
And I think it's, the engineering solutions are out there, right? It's definitely not the spirit tube. It's not the one, but there were other engineering solutions that were proposed, and that's engineering, right? Like the spiritual sense should be left to the tribe to decide, right? Because the tribe believes, in more circular, that the health of those ancestors and spiritual health of those ancestors is directly connected with the health of the youth and the future generations, right? So if we're respecting that full cycle, today and the past and the present, that's where those good relationships and that healthy culture for all of us is going to come from. That engineering solution, it needs to stay separate from that, right? And not get in the mix of that and respect the tribe's understanding of spirit, and not, and deal with the hydrology in a different way that's able to be done. And I had something else, but I'll let it go. Yeah. So it gets back to that same way of like, if we can have that circular thinking and respect for each other, then we understand the path forward,
Is there time for one more?
Oh no, it's up to you guys.
Anyway, so I just, Quentin, I just wanted to comment at first to say that the cultural divides that the Army Corps has with the rest of the world are numerous and wide, but it's symptomatic of the greater problem. So this has been a fascinating conversation, and 1,000 things are bouncing through my mind. The first thing that occurs to me is how comparable the situation that tribes, Native American tribes have, and probably Aboriginal people all around the planet have, is very similar to what small island developing states have to deal with. Both small island developing states and Aboriginal people are burdened extensively by the impacts of climate change, but your responsibility is trivial. It's not like you're numerous in driving, burning fossil fuels and like the industrialization of major nations. And the other thing is your value systems, I think, are comparable. A deeper sense of place, at least deeper in time, maybe a greater appreciation of your heritage because you've been together as a people, or you've been stranded, if you will, on a small island for many, many generations. So with all of that in mind, is there any effort to bring Native American tribes and unionize them when it comes to climate kinds of conversations? COP, the Conference of the Parties, has this system. There are parties within COP that are specialized or they represent, like the small island developing states, they have a representative voice because they share that commonality. Does such a thing exist for Native peoples from around the planet?
Yeah, there's a number of organizations for Indigenous people across North America and the world where there's a lot of information sharing, relationship building on a number of fronts. Some of that is also climate change. Juan mentioned the 2 climate camps that he's been to, the last one I was able to go to. Tremendous amount of information sharing and relationship building through USET and TICC is coming up. There's a whole network. And I know that the tribe, I don't know if we formally had representation at COP, but Dante went through Indigenous youth, Two-Spirit group that went and kind of reported there and reported back. So there are a number of collaborations and networks that look to align the voices of Indigenous peoples around the world and kind of call up that voice a little bit stronger.
Yeah, I think I think the groups is just seen differently. I think it's where tribes help one another with those issues and then bring them to the forefront. So like I mentioned with United South and Eastern Tribes, they have a very huge and they deal with all tribal issues, right? And I think when they're based out of like DCs, you know, like they deal with a lot of political at hand. But within there, that's where a lot of the huge tribes have a huge lift with one another and a huge helping hand with USET and the climate division. So they deal with a lot of putting those resources together, putting tribes in touch with one another. How can they help? I think for me, that helped me out from when we first started. Like, where do we start? How do we get folks that actually do like Western-based science, but that'll understand it our way and not talk down to us, but actually see us as an equal partner or understand what we're trying to achieve for the community that's not for their greater outcome and putting their interest above the tribes. And I think that's where you see that those groups come together is actually helping each other out, helping each other resources. I mean, I've done it for a long time where we've done just being able to reach out to one another. And I think also tribes see each other very differently. I think they see each other's needs very differently. They know they're very unique to each one. Some of them where you'll have their tribal representation be also their traditional leader, who's also their TIPO, who's also their chairperson, right? While others are like the Seminole tribe is a reorganization tribe. So afterwards, you know, with having a council with delegation, which is separate from the traditional leader, which is separate from the TIPO. So each tribe is unique to itself, but they all have the same tribal issues. So they know where to get the focal points and where to help each other out as a resource, help each other out where they're like, hey, how do we lift each other up? And then share amongst like when I went to that 2019 camp, that was actually hosted by the Northwestern tribes, but we were invited up there from connections from the Southeast. So it just varies on different, I guess, issues. So for the climate, I think, particularly for just talking about climate, there are ways to kind of network with one another.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It has been a very incredible discussion. So thank you for being here and leading this great panel. And thank you everybody for your incredible questions. We are now going to have a smaller break because we actually have to go now to room 106 where we will continue with the rest of the presentations. So if you need to go to the restrooms, know that there's in every single floor. Feel free to do so and grab some more water, coffee, or pastries. Thank you for having us.